Welcome back. So today we are going to conclude a week of tea sessions with a fun one called the BLON X Z Jojo. So this of course is the collaboration between BLON and Z Reviews, named Jojo, purple graphics up front, some of the BLON words that were made them famous in the back, and something different that you don't see all that often on the BLON boxes. They actually give you an about both brands. Those of you who don't know who Z Reviews is, don't know who BLON is, there you go. You can hit pause and catch up on what those two things are. So kind of right away, I think people will gravitate towards this one simply for the look, for the cable. You know, I think some people are just attracted to it. It's unique looking. This is actually the old BLON BL05S style shell. I think the original 05 had the, I think, gold inset like that, but it was a silver shell. And then there was the 05S, which of course was the green one, which looks a little different. So this one is all in purple. The cable, of course, is super nice. And those of you who have actually bought HBB's collaboration with them, you know that they have been on quite a move with their cables. I mean, again, another one is, it looks just like an upgrade cable that you would buy from some store. Super nice, 4-core, beefy, purple and silver. You know, can't really go wrong with that color scheme. So we'll kind of begin there and say kind of right away, buy it for the looks or the cable. Sure, I think I understand that. I don't think people are going to really complain about that. I think it's pretty obvious that some people are just into the look, into the cable, into supporting Z Reviews. You know, I think all those things make sense. For, you know, kind of what makes this one a little different than previous BLON sets, the base level. I would call this one Moar. And we'll really pick up where we kind of left on the last tea session. So with CCA Duo, I really talked about this group of sets, and Duo is this base level that's very neutral, minimal, is how do you say it? So there are a lot of people who really like a very neutral style, minimal amount of bass. Your Duo, Duo Titan S, Aria Snow Edition, you guys are down here. Somewhere in the middle is what I usually refer to as Kiwi Ears Cadenza. It tends to split the middle on lots of different sets. It's usually my middle of the road set. Those of you who like enough mid bass to kind of cover into pop genres, that's kind of what Cadenza is in the red. Those of you who like Duo and Titan S, you think that Cadenza is a little too bloated, a little too much mid-bass, so you prefer this bottom line. Cadenza is a pretty average, middle-of-the-road. You don't know what to get, you pick the one that's sort of right in the middle. And then we have Jojo, and Jojo is quite a bit of mid-bass. It is a nice, healthy bump right there. So you can kind of see that there's, you know, people... This specialty group is people who like a minimal set of bass, and then there's, you know, the Jojo fans, people who like a lot of mid bass. And if you're trying to figure out which set is better, Duo, Cadenza, or Jojo, these are from like 3 different planets. They don't really sound alike. People who are into this style really like this style. They're not going to consider buying Jojo. People who are really into Jojo would look at this and say there's no bass. I don't know how you could listen to that. It's probably thin and kind of weak. And so, yeah, you know, I think this just really comes down to a bass preference, or, you know, how this fits in with your library and how you like to listen to it. So yeah, it's quite a bit of mid bass, quite a bit more of what we saw in, if you consider the Harmon style sets where Cadenza lies, you know, that sort of a leaner male vocal style Harmon. So Jojo is not that. Jojo is your full complement of mid bass, and kind of has a Z300-ish reduced pinna gain there and nice extension there. So lots of good stuff going on with the graph. But, you know, I'll call that base level Moar. Very much a preference set, like I was just talking about. Not as much a which BLON is better, but which is better for you and your library. And I used to talk about Harry Styles' Golden a lot. And if you jump right to the beginning of that track, 14 seconds in, what are you expecting to hear? And there's some sets that are heavy mid-bass sets, and you end up with a very thick bass-driven rock track. The whole bottom level of that track tends to it's almost like a black hole. It kind of absorbs everything, and it becomes the driving force for that song. It's the main part that you hear. His vocals are kind of riding on top of it, but it becomes a bass-driven rock track. And JoJo sounds pretty much right there. If you prefer that bass to be present, but a little less present in the mix, kind of it is a foundation to it, but it's not all of it. A more open, airy sound, and JoJo is just a bit heavy for that. And the Smiths sort of hit it right in the same spot. I think of the Smiths as a faster, lighter sound. It has a bass to it, but I kind of like my Smiths to be faster and lighter, and it's just my preference. And the same thing on this track. The JoJo will give it a heavier, thicker sound. Other sets, not as much. But I think those two tracks sort of cover where people draw the line on to, this is too much mid-bass, this is how I like to listen to it. Too much for me, it's a good way to gauge where you are on the bass preference scale. So compared to Z300, so the previous BLON collaboration with Hawaii Bad Boy, I actually like that one quite a bit. I talked about Outkast Bombs Over Baghdad. It has a bouncier speed that was kind of more aligned to the vocals. The vocals have a really fast cadence to it. The bass kind of bounces along with it, doesn't go too deep. It kind of moves along, defined, nice and sharp. And it has a bigger sound. And on JoJo, it sort of takes on a more fun party with a subwoofer in a corner sound, right? It's got this, and we can kind of see what JoJo did here. So if we look at Z300, has kind of a little less mid bass. It kind of comes off as not quite as deep there. It's a little faster, a little more defined, and it kind of keeps on moving along. JoJo goes a lot deeper, and it has that subwoofer in a corner, depth to it, and that's kind of what it sounds like. The vocals over a big subwoofer somewhere in the room. And this little bit is kind of a wash, whether one is really all that different in the pin area. They're pretty close. So, but, again, this is sort of two style of bass. Some people like faster, sharper, high quality bass, and then some people just want a level that is super fun and sounds like a party. That's exactly what JoJo is. And yes, I think JoJo does a pretty respectable party version of Party Rock Anthem if you're really into that track. Again, big bass. And on this one, the bass level, if you're listening to it at a low volume, it's kind of okay. You kind of get the idea. Turn this JoJo up. Again, this lean actually, this lower pin gain works really well on both sets for turning it up. The volume actually scales really well. That's only, 5, 6, or 7 dB or so right there in pin gain. Very easygoing, very great set to turn it up so it sounds like a party. And yes, it does a very respectable job on that one. So bass, we've talked about bass too much already. Yes, it is very fun levels of mid bass. On the mids, and again, I think lots of sets, and I've talked about this even this week, when the center of gravity kind of shifts a little bit lower into the mid bass, the way JoJo does, right? So this sort of is the center point. Instead of being in the mids and some Harmon sets, it's kind of right up here. But when you shift it down and really bump out and put a lot of weight right here, that tends to favor male vocals. And I think it actually works the same here. I think the bass takes you right into male vocals. Dancier tracks, dancier female tracks sound fine over heavy bass, and it ends up sounding a little clubby, right? Big bass, female that's kind of clean and clear over it. All that sounds pretty great, especially on your EDM. And that tilt is just slightly different presentation. So I think Madonna's What It Feels Like for a Girl, the Above and Beyond club edit, it's a little less ethereal. I think on some sets that have a lot of upper extension, that one goes pretty far out there and it gets ethereal and twinkly. But this one kind of sounds like that bassy club, and her voice sounds fine. It's just kind of solid, fun representation playback on that specific track. Treble wise, again, solid extension on the graph. It goes kind of way out there. If we look at both sets, actually do the same thing. I'm not sure what is going on with JoJo's 12-ish peak out there. It didn't make any sense to me, but it shows up on everyone's graph. It doesn't necessarily sound like that. I don't know what it is, but treble wise, kind of similar. They both kind of extend out as much as they should. But again, it's just a little harder to hear upper extension over all that mid bass. That 12K peak is a bit mysterious, but your perception of that upper treble really leads to your perception of the stage. And on this one, again, I would say it's sort of intimately sized space with a big subwoofer in it, right? There's a whole lot of bass that fills the sound stage. It might be harder to pinpoint every instrument and every note, but it's tons of fun. And that's, I think, how you would sum up most of what JoJo does is just tons of fun. Party set, big bass, big mid bass set. So there you go. That is what I have on JoJo. And thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.